Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you forward thinkers and co-presenters. Much obliged. We're going to talk about New York Stretch Code. What is the New York Stretch Code? Basically, it's a readily adoptable local energy code that's an overlay of the current New York State Energy Conservation Construction Code. It's about 10–11% more efficient or more stringent than the current statewide code. And it's been the ability to adopt advanced codes been in the works since the Energy Code and the statewide codes were adopted in 1979, basically enabled by the Article 11 of the Energy Law. So what do we do with it? Well, essentially, we're preparing jurisdictions, municipalities for future energy code cycles, and working towards the statewide energy goals and clean energy goals. It's intended to follow the cycles of the base statewide code, which usually changes every 3–4 years, and we'll do that. There is a bit of a misconception around that. Well, we're going to be adopting this stretch code in the next code cycle in 2023 anyway. That is not true. It's a little different. It's equal energy efficiency, but it's not the same code. So that is not true. And there's a whole lot of good reasons why adopting it now is advantageous, that you'll hear more from Mark Thielking about, no doubt. It essentially is, state-of-the-shelf technology. It's not rocket science. It's not state-of-the-art. It's things you can do, small tweaks that are made to the base energy code to make it 10 or 11% better. And it also does approach some of the requirements of the next version of the National Model Energy Code that will be enhanced and adopted by New York State. So it doesn't allow or doesn't require really new technologies, new methodologies, new products. It's all just doing a little better with the same stuff, essentially. And you can see my screen okay in the presentation. I've left it in this view because sometimes it's helpful to be able to go back to older slides. Everybody good with it? So yes, there is money involved, and there is the connection with clean energy communities. This is one of the highest scoring action grants. Communities can get 1,200 points towards the competitive grant system, on top of the $5,000 that the community will get for simply adopting it. So, and then there's multiple tens of thousands of grants that are available depending on where you score in your total points area. Of course, there's plenty of energy benefits, energy and cost savings of around that 11%. It's very cost effective. I'll talk about that shortly here. 1 to 2% incremental costs over current new construction with paybacks that are around 10 years or less. And of course has, for that reason, greater greenhouse gas reductions. The residential requirement in New York Stretch Code is approaching near net zero. And it has a number of areas that help verify performance of the homes. Mark, no doubt, will talk about that too. And most importantly, it addresses the areas of where 40% of our energy is consumed. I even think that, it's the non-energy benefits that are actually even more important to me. If we save energy and money in our communities, that helps everybody. Lower operating costs, but bottom line is investments in energy efficiency and clean energy, those dollars stay in your community. You save it, you spend it, and it stays in your community many times over. Many organizations have proved this over the last, 3 decades. Lots of climate and community benefits as well. We know that there's a big push on in workforce development. There are more and more developers and builders promoting green building and clean energy programs in their real estate and construction programs. And, it definitely improves community attractiveness. Codes always help in the area of more resilient, more durable construction and communities. And of course, now with the concerns about COVID and such, environmental issues, much healthier indoor environments with some of the requirements. And so, greater comfort means greater resident satisfaction, et cetera. One of the other things that is valuable here for communities, the energy code has always been a bit of a poor stepchild, if I might. Code jurisdictions are very hard pressed. They're worked very hard right now. Notwithstanding the COVID and the materials shortages and cost increases, but this code also promotes the use of third-party code compliance specialists, which there are now some terrific incentives for. We'll talk about that shortly. And a number of communities are already implementing that. Projects all over the state that do comply with the New York Stretch Code. This particular one is upstate, up in the Finger Lakes, but in the same climate zone as Orange County. This community is a kind of a moderate income rental property that that uses all of the thermal requirements of the New York Stretch Code. In addition, there also is ground source heat pump being used here, but just improving the building envelope, the building enclosure with the code, New York Stretch Code requirements, has this very affordable rental property in the Finger Lakes region, rented all the time. Let's talk a little bit about the cost impacts. For commercial construction on a statewide basis, the percent savings, and this is across all 3 of the New York climate zones and 9 different building types, the savings is about 7% with an incremental cost of just over $1 square foot. And a simple payback, which is really not the right way to look at payback, but the short-term payback is about 10 years. And most importantly, you need to understand that this is all without any incentives, okay? So one thing nice about the New York Stretch is you can take advantage of incentives by the utilities, in some cases by NYSERDA or from NYSERDA, to help offset any small costs there are for going to the New York Stretch Code. And that's depicted here. In Climate Zone 5, we see about 21% of the climate zone wide construction being 21%. Cost savings, again, a little over 10%, a little over 9 years for a simple payback at a price of about $1.80 a square foot. On the residential side, looking first at single family, the incremental cost per dwelling unit is about $2,000 with a simple payback of a little over 5 years. So very cost effective, again, without any incentives. A multifamily, about $1,500. And these prices or these costs were done in the cost benefit analysis. I'll show you where it is in a little bit here. But so, these prices have gone up a bit with the recent surge in inflation, but still, a very small component of current building and housing costs. On the residential side, we're seeing similar numbers, couple $1,000 for single family homes, multifamily about $1,700, again, by climate zone, with payback in 5.5 and 8+ years for single family and multifamily respectively. As I said, there's lots of programs that you can take advantage of. Any smart builder is doing this already, or homeowner or whoever. Power authority or the utility in your area all have HVAC, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, insulation, and custom whole building for commercial incentive programs that oftentimes will pay for any incremental costs that arises from going to the New York Stretch, and sometimes even more than that incremental cost. Those specific NYSERDA funding opportunities here, there's a fantastic third-party support program opportunity notice number 4600 that pays communities to actually take advantage of a list of third parties to conduct a lot of the code enforcement aspects for energy in their communities. Plus, maybe gear up a little bit and use more electronic systems for those plan reviews and site inspections. So there's also an energy code plan review and direct plan review and inspection service. This RFQL here makes available certified folks who are part of that program. And then there's also some beyond basic code stretch to zero pilot programs and net zero energy construction programs to take advantage of. As with the statewide base energy code, we still have the same 4 compliance paths on the residential side. There's a prescriptive path where designers and builders come in with R values for their building envelope system and the other mandatory requirements. There's a performance path. Actually, there's 2 performance paths. There's a full performance path where the energy cost is 80% less than a home built to the base energy code. And then there's also the ERI path in there as well. These are paths that are available under the basic New York statewide energy code. It's just a little harder to get there. As you can see over here, the energy rating index number that the home energy rater has to get the design to for the builder or homeowner or building developer of 50, the lower the better, whereas the base code is 62. I won't go into detail on that. You don't want to know that yet. But there's training that you can get to better understand all of that. One of the nicest things is that, at least for code enforcement in municipalities, is that the 2 of the best compliance tools used for code enforcement in communities are the ResCheck and the ComCheck compliance tools that actually I was part of developing back in the mid-90s for U.S. Department of Energy. It's a free software that designers and builders and even homeowners can use to show compliance for their designs, and code officials can use for their enforcement. And as you can see down here, there's a code to select. This is used all over the country for all the different codes that are adopted in different places. There's a New York Stretch version that NYSERDA paid to develop, and it produces some fantastic compliance certificates, which brings together all the data that the code official needs to have when we when we get to full enforcement. So really good stuff available for enforcement. It does not create a lot of extra work, if any extra work, to adopt the New York Stretch Code. What I'm hearing back from most municipalities, it's, the game is still the same. The system is still the same since it's built off the base energy code. It is worked the same way. The game's the same, but the numbers have changed just a little bit. Down in your neck of the woods, these are some of the communities that have adopted. A lot of activity down this way. I haven't updated this map with all the upstate communities, but it's gaining momentum. Got kind of a late start, but very competitive down your way. Lots of resources as well for your use as a community. There's an adoption guide which has been updated to take care of one little glitch we had with the New York State Department of State, which requires a community to file with them and the New York Code Council. And there's also a model local law that has been cleaned up and modified to accommodate the latest requirements from Department of State. There's a fair amount of training and technical support. That technical support being me and the New York Stretch Circuit Riders. And from this point on, for those of you and for the county that need my backup technical support in any way, shape, or form, my time is your time. As I mentioned before, there's technical enforcement tools and checklists. One of the other beauties of this whole thing is there's a single volume code book coming soon that gives the New York Stretch overlay requirements right in with the base New York statewide energy code, which means you only have to go to one book for the energy code, which is something that the code officials really love. The res check and com check tools and software are available. They're free. There's a hotline for technical and interpretation assistance. As I said, us circuit riders, and all of that can be found here. And you will have, actually did a couple small updates to this presentation, Kate, but and I will get it to you, but all of this information is on the one I gave you. And once again, there has been a few glitches with early adopters. There was a couple of small conflicts in the adoption of the New York Stretch. That's been all ironed out and cleaned up. So that information is with you in that adoption guide. So with that, I can take some questions based on your time needs, or if there's not a lot of questions right now, we can pass to Mark so he can get out where he's got to get to. But here are your contacts in your region, including mine. Again, do not hesitate to call me, email me, but just pick up the phone and give me a shout, and I'm glad to work with you on this whole thing. And this is the whole structure of the technical support for the New York Stretch Energy Code. So with that, I'm going to leave the presentation up if we need to go back to a slide, but Kate, it's all yours to decide what we do and don't do.
Thank you. Can you go back to that slide with the structure though, too? Because I feel if I'm confused by all the NYSERDA and all the contacts others are, so that's
so the
how it
program
goes.
manager is Christopher Scroy.
Right, top down, state, region.
Yeah, and then
okay.
Actually, I don't work for Newport Ventures. I contract with them, but they are the managers for the circuit rider contract and the technical support. And then these are the different regions with my name in here for Westchester County, for the Capital Region and the North Country.
Yep. Okay.
And those are all the numbers you need.
Thank you for being stepping in for Matt when he couldn't make it. You know, one thing I don't know if folks are aware, but all these programs, I assume, are paid with system benefits charge monies from everyone's account, right?
I think so. You never
Yeah.
know if there isn't some money coming over from Ridgey or any of that too, but yes, I believe it's all coming from particularly
Okay.
incentives like these here.
Right.
are
And I'm
coming
going to ask you to go back to that once Mark is done and leaves. We do want to talk about the Stretch to Zero pilot project again. But does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute. I think we have a civilized crowd here. If you need to ask Mike a question now before we move forward, we don't want you to be confused. Mark's going to give us an account of real boots on the ground, it happening in the town of Bedford. So while you're thinking of your questions, I'll introduce Mark. Mark Thielking serves, so he's the Director of Energy and Sustainability in the town of Bedford, and he serves as a consultant to the town of Bedford as the Director of Energy and Sustainability, that's what we just said, where he assists staff and elected leadership in the areas of energy use, carbon pollution, and environmental sustainability again. If we had a dime for every time we say sustainability, right? Mark, do you want to pull up your slides? Can you do that, or do you need me to do something?
I think if Mike just releases his, I can pull
Okay.
up mine.
Yeah,
Great.
and I'm having trouble releasing here. I can't get back to the area where I.
All right,
Well,
I'll let you
stop
work
sharing.
on that while I continue with Mark. Also owns Logical Efficiency LLC in Katona, which provides consultation and implementation services and assists the public and private entities in scaling clean energy improvements through innovative community-based marketing, finance, and policy.
Mark, you can share now. There you go.
From 2011 until 2019, Mark served as one of the founders, the first board chair and executive director of the Energy Improvement Corporation. Some of you may remember him if you were around then. He was working on the PACE project, PACE financing. Orange County was the first one, and Mark and I go way back on that. We also had the first statewide project at the Five Spokes Cheesery place on, I'm going to forget what road that is on. I'll get back to you. And while managing the EIC, Mark led the development and adoption of PACE finance local laws in over 40 municipalities that represent over 50% of non-New York City population of New York State. So Mark, please tell us how you put everything Mike just talked about into action.
Thank you, Kate. And we do go way back. And it was great to see your email inviting me to speak today, and really exciting to talk about our experience implementing what Mike DeWine just talked about. And we did have some hiccups, I'd say, but I think overall it's worked out pretty well. I'd like to just start though by talking a little bit about Bedford and our foundational efforts. In 2009, we completed a community-wide CO2 inventory using 2004 data, which showed that 68% of our emissions and essentially our pollution come from buildings, 27% from transportation, and 5% from waste. The following year, we set a goal to reduce those emissions 20% by 2020. Part of the effort to do that and to achieve that goal was to initiate a climate action plan, which included things such as a custom Bedford Energy Code, not the Stretch Code, because we didn't have it back then, but we actually created a code specific for Bedford that was above the standard state code. We also did Energize Bedford, we did PACE financing, we did Solarize, we did all these, quite a few things in the intervening years. Fast forward to 2019, when we re-inventoried our emissions, we had a 44% reduction in CO2. Interestingly, the breakdown was that about 2/3 of that reduction came from buildings, about 20% came from transportation, and about 14% came from waste. What was very interesting, though, to us was that even though we had such a huge contribution from buildings, only 4%, we only saw a 4% reduction in energy use. And that is because the vast majority of our improvements was the fact that the NYSEG grid and the Con Ed grid got so much less carbon intensive. Now, a 4% reduction isn't something to sneeze at. That's actually pretty amazing because most communities grow at about a 1 to 2% rate. So for us to see a 4% reduction in energy use was pretty amazing, and that's why all those programs were important. But it really emphasized the need to focus on buildings, continue to focus on buildings, because today we have an 80% reduction, and existing buildings contribute 50% of emissions. And about 2/3 of those existing building emissions comes from burning stuff in our buildings. About a third or 13% come from the electricity. And so, we had we just have to continue to focus on buildings is the main point here. Our buildings are performing poorly. These are existing buildings. But we absolutely don't want to perpetuate this problem with poorly performing new buildings and renovated buildings. So it became really clear that, one thing we actually have a lot of control over is our building codes. So we, obviously have the backdrop of the CLCPA, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and a lot of the focus on the CLCPA is reducing energy use in buildings. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to look at what our powers are as a local government and a community to affect positive outcomes. And so we noticed that there are quite a few policies out there that protect our citizens, whether it's having police services and street improvements for safe streets, whether it's requiring things to happen to facades or to sidewalks to make sure that people are safe when they're walking, right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of policy out there that is given, or powers given to local governments to pass policy to protect citizens and provide public benefits. So, again, in the tradition of local priorities and protecting citizens, we knew we had to address buildings through policy. And so that's really a fundamental high-level learning. Might be, given that we're mostly a governmental group, I think we're understanding that that's the fact, but we do have to remind ourselves that we do have this tool. And that again flows right back into the regulation of our new buildings. So Energy Conservation Code, as Mike was talking about, it's the minimum base code related to how our buildings are built and how they're renovated. The advantages of this existing code is that it's generally known, generally understood. Code officials, as you all know, and as you probably all are, is that it's a known quantity. But the problem with the code, and this goes going back, for as long as the code's been in existence, is that it's very difficult to enforce and to understand if the buildings are meeting the target. Again, the idea that a brand new building should be coming out of that process meeting a HERS of 62 can't be proven unless you're testing that building. And because most of the energy code around the state is applied in a prescriptive format, meaning that measure by measures are checked off as opposed to looking at the whole building, this is generally a difficult way to say that a building actually is meeting the energy efficiency target. And when you have this requirement, this need to protect. Can you hear me? I can't hear you, Kate, but I guess you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. There was
Okay,
a problem
good.
with someone coming in. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So the bottom line is, the existing Energy Conservation Code, I think it's fine, but it's difficult to enforce. And the way it's generally imposed is not easy to prove that it's working well. It's also not simple for renovations. So given our tradition in implementing custom codes, we were very familiar with how that a building code that is above the standard could really affect our community. And we were actually in the process of developing a new custom code because our previous code passed in 2009 or 2010 was obsolete, frankly. And then Mike came to us, hey, we should do New York Stretch. We took a look at it. It certainly is a turnkey approach. We really liked the fact that the HERS target was significantly lower than the standard Energy Conservation Code. We liked that the paybacks were very reasonable. Obviously, we're focused on making sure our new buildings aren't contributing to the greenhouse gas challenge we have. But again, as it stands, and as most building departments are used to imposing energy codes, it's very difficult to know if it's being enforced unless you take some additional measures that we took to prove that this code is being implemented properly. So I wanted to walk through some of the custom elements that Bedford adopted. One of the first ones that Mike mentioned already is that there's an energy ratings index pathway. There are actually 4 pathways, as Mike mentioned. We chose to require only the energy rating index pathway because number one, the local community can set the index target. You can actually calibrate that to a certain level. We didn't change it from the target of the existing stretch code because we thought that was pretty robust. But the main point is that qualified third parties will certify compliance, and this is really key. You know, our building department is not qualified to use a whole building testing approach to the implementation of an energy code. If we use 30 qualified third parties, this is done for us. The other big benefit of using an energy rating index pathway is that the building is designed from the get-go to comply with the project, and it's a flexible application of the code, meaning that there are components that might be above code, meaning more energy efficient. You could trade those off with some things that are very difficult to get to code, allowing you to get to that rating index target. So we thought this was a no-brainer. We actually had a rating index custom code back starting in 2010. So this was something that actually our building department demanded because they already were relying on third parties to help them see that these buildings were complying with the code. The other, another custom code component to us is that we wanted to make sure that our local priorities were met as well. So we added very specific language around air leakage tests, which already is in the code, but we wanted to emphasize them because air leakage is the enemy of a very high-performing building, especially when it comes to ducts. When ducts are leaky and they're blowing conditioned air into spaces that shouldn't have that, it's a waste of energy. We also wanted to make sure that ventilation was emphasized because, again, tight buildings, you need to have the best ventilation to keep those occupants healthy. We also impose a solar ready component and an EV charging ready component as well, meaning that our new buildings have to be solar ready for solar panels unless there are certain criteria that they do not meet. Also, they need to be ready for EV charging. We also tried to do a heat pump ready, and this actually ran into issues with the Code Council. We wanted to make sure that the electrical service was big enough and that there was space in the basement, but I have a lot of, I could set up a whole nother webinar about how frustrating that was to get that rejected. And but I think that's coming. So I wanted to flag this as a potential other custom component that you might want to consider if you're considering adopting the stretch code. And really the last custom component that we added is that we wanted to make sure that we set the rules on who can show adherence. So who is qualified to rate this building? We wanted to make sure that these entities were qualified. So we instituted an affidavit process where the qualifier must meet certain criteria, and they must sign off on them based on a certificate that they're licensed basically on certain criteria that they hold. So if it's in the case of a new residential building, they're resident certified HERS raters. So they're signing off that they are that, and they have to show proof that they are that qualified. If they're rating a residential renovation, they need to show that they're an engineer and certain qualifications. And again, they're signing based on their certificate, which they have to show, and their qualifications. So this was a key component to, again, proving that third parties are qualified, but also that the building department is comfortable with who is involved in the building. So those were the three areas that we modified the stretch code. Overall, the feedback has been from the building department has been neutral, I'd say. Their view is, quite honestly, that every 2 to 3 years we get a new energy code anyway, and whether we're imposing stretch or imposing the new energy conservation code, everyone grumbles. So that's really not a major factor. I think the overarching issues, though, when you're considering this and you don't have a tradition of a custom code, which we did, the question is asking, do you have qualified raters in the community if you want to adopt an ERI path? Does your building department have the capability of doing this on their own? And certainly the perceived costs and competitiveness of imposing a code are, again, perceptions, and to push back on those are really important. And our building department happens to know that the perceived costs and how this code is actually an advantage to the community was pretty well documented in our environment, because we've already had custom codes going back almost 15 years. So with that, you know, I just want to step back to our original point of looking at this topic in the first place. We don't want to make our environmental sustainability and carbon goals harder with poorly performing buildings. And with all the extra co-benefits of imposing a tighter building code, we thought this was a no-brainer. We were one of the first communities in the state to pass it. It certainly was not easy because there were those hiccups, but I think overall it's a win-win on so many fronts. So overall, we're a big endorsement of robust energy codes, needless to say. Kate, do you want me to touch on some of the other things we're working on in Bedford, or should we stop here? Okay, but really quickly, you know, we're involved in the Climate Smart Communities program, where we have a bronze status. We're also involved in the Clean Energy Communities program, and this is a list of the measures that we've adopted or that we've moved forward with under that Clean Energy Communities program. So as you saw, we had a climate action plan. We've done CCA, which I think you're going to hear a lot about that later. We've adopted New York Stretch. We've changed all our streetlights to LEDs. We not only have had a clean heating and cooling campaign, but we also have a demonstration building here in Bedford. We converted our community house completely over to non-fossil based energy heating sources. So that's a demonstration building we're showing to the community. This was a pretty big project from the standpoint that it was a building built in 1910 and had not had a drop of investment. So it was a huge renovation, which we decided at the time of forward with that renovation that we were going to get off fossil fuels. And it's just a fantastic building. We have EVs and charging capability in our town fleet. We've had EVs for about 10 years, so it's been a mixed bag because the early EVs were very short range. The newer ones are better. We obviously our Climate Smart Community campaign, bronze status. We've had community solar campaigns, clean heat campaigns, and the EV campaign is actually just starting, and we've had a demand response campaign as well. These are all campaigns that the Clean Energy Communities program helps you launch and move forward with. We benchmark all our town buildings. That's actually a law that was passed that every building needs to be benchmarked on a semi-annual basis. And of course, we have PACE financing. So all these measures have allowed us to be on the top 5 of the list of communities in the state. And we have won a lot of grant money. So I encourage you to look at this. And I think there's more money to be won. And I'll stop there.
Fantastic, Mark. Thank you. You've given us so much, for me, inspiration. I don't want to hog the floor. While we're waiting for questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. Do you want to tell us, this looks like it's an elevated building, Mark, and are you doing geothermal under there now?
I just love this picture because
the door hanging is pretty fun.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I think they're putting a new foundation in, that's for sure. I'm not so associated with this business. I just saw this picture and this situation. I took a picture of it and I'm like, oh, this is great.
Well, it's a lifted house.
That's a raised ranch. That's a raised ranch becoming a full colonial. That's very cool.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
I have seen a lot
like that.
I have seen a lot larger buildings getting lifted. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And they're doing it all the time by the shore communities. But the door hanging there looks just so fun. Yeah, let's hope that they put in geothermal when they do that. So does anyone have any questions?
I see a hand up. Michelle Lindsay has a hand up.
Please, Michelle, go.
Hi, Mark. What did you use as a guideline or a toolkit for doing your inventories?
So way back in 2009, we used ICLEI.
Oh, okay, good.
And that, I mean, I would have to say that I am, and then in 2000, we actually did two updates, one in 2014 and one in 2017. In both cases, we leveraged the same methodologies, but just used different consultants to help us do that. I have to say it's a whole lot easier now if you have natural gas in your community and you have obviously utility service to get that data. We literally were pulling teeth to get the data back in 2009, but now it's all on, it's really, you could look it up in an hour and have the data for your community related to utility use of energy. The questions become, and where the consultants help, is when you have to estimate oil use or propane use and your transportation emissions. These are all a little bit more complex. So I would encourage you to get a ICLEI and or other consultant to assist in just getting going. And I think NYSERDA certainly has a lot of capabilities there.
Yeah, we joined the ICLEI program for this one, so I was just curious if that's what you had used. Well, thanks.
I have a small favor to ask, Kate.
Go ahead.
So I just had my 19-month-old grandmother come in and asked if GPA could read her a bedtime story. We're having a sleepover because her brother's about to arrive any minute or day now, and we're in support mode. So if it were possible, I'd like to take questions on the New York stretch, and if we satisfy folks there, I'd like to duck out, if I might.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions for Mike or Mark?
I think Jeff has his hand up.
I didn't see that. Oh, yes, Jeff, please go.
Jeff. You're
All
muted,
right.
Jeff.
If we're waiting for Jeff,
Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Mark, it's probably a longer conversation. I suspect you guys have done tons, but I'm curious, did you guys work with the school district as well? Has there been coordination or activity by the school district in Bedford?
Less than you'd think. It's, they're a separate municipal entity.
Yeah.
And we actually have two school districts in town. I'm actually on the sustainability committee of one of them, and that district has done a lot. And not just because of me, but the other district has been less coordination, unfortunately.
Interesting. All right, I'll follow up with you to find out which district did more. So thanks.
So I would like to follow up on Michelle's question to you, Mark, and tell the group that about the climate action plan and the greenhouse gas inventory that Mark's referenced. The county applied for a grant from the state some years back for a county-wide greenhouse gas inventory with the intent of having it down at the community level so that we can help the villages in the town do exactly what Mark did for the town of Bedford. These are large undertakings that have significant costs to them. So we have been funded and we are trying to put that out to bid, but it is stuck in law for quite a few months. And when it does get released, which it has to sometime, we'll do that countywide. And what needs to go with it is what Mark also introduced, was the climate action plan. Once you take your greenhouse gas inventory, and maybe Mark, you could speak to this personally, you take all those numbers that Mark found out that you have, what your emissions are in what sectors, the building, transportation, the waste, and then you figure out some goals and targets to how to improve those. And you saw that with 2009 and 2019 and how they kept updating it, that they'll reduce it by 20% by 2020 and something by, I don't think I got as far as 80% by 2030.
Mm.
But you need to memorialize that in a climate action plan, and it has to be adopted by the village or the town, like the town of Bedford did. And you know who really does those things is back to my Conservation Advisory Council / Climate Smart Community, a group of invested, interested folks like Mark in your community that are willing to take the time. This is an enormous amount of time that needs to be put into this. And it's the volunteers that are going to do this. So if you can get, this is the biggest takeaway, is get back to your municipal officials and get a board appointed to do everything from LED lighting to stormwater quality we're going to hear about, water sampling, anything. But this is one of them that they can grab this greenhouse gas inventory that I'm giving you and a climate action plan template, but I can't do everything for 43 municipalities. So I'm giving you the tools. You need the group of people there to embrace it and to really think about it, because you know your board members are, you know, inundated with a lot of other issues, and this may go lower on the totem pole. So I implore you all to start thinking about that group of people that can do all those things that I've talked about before, because at some point, hopefully in the next year, we'll be trying to reach out to you about the greenhouse gas inventory. And then, Mark, I go further, unless anyone has something to say about that, to say, you know, one of the webinars that we were on this week, a code enforcer from, I believe, Dobbs Ferry said it was an aha moment. All of a sudden he saw the light. It all made sense. It was what he had been fighting his whole career. And then all of a sudden it said, yeah, why not? This does make sense. So for Mark to carefully choose the word that the building department feedback was neutral, that's a good thing. I know I've had a lot of negative pushback just trying to get the solar unified permit passed in villages. And then once the Climate Smart Community Program came out from the state and offered $5,000, they signed right up, but they didn't want to hear about it before that. So you have to get your code enforcers on board, and there's so many training programs out there. Heck, I think I'm going to send this video to them. And then one thing that the larger code officials in the state, whatever group, I can never remember the acronyms of code officials, said to me was that they weren't really on board with the stretch. They were worried about the breathing and the venting issue and the proper training. Mike, can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, that's, I'm not sure what you mean by breathing and venting, but nevertheless, training, there is training specifically for New York Stretch. It is certified for New York State code officials, so they can earn their in-service training credits for it. And it's on that page that I showed you, or a link to it is, that's in the presentation. Again, you've got a version of that with all the important information on it you can give to anyone. I'm not sure what you mean by the first part of your question.
I think there was some concern that the tighter you make the house, the venting issues. And Mark talked about that. Of course, no one wants the health, but I think some code enforcers, and maybe without the training, they're still worried. It can be done effectively, but that is what they gave me some concerns when I said, hey, why can't we adopt this on a wider scale? So
yeah,
that
there's a huge misconception about building tighter homes. I mean, people think that we're building thermos bottles and everybody's going to suffocate and all that stuff. The tightness requirements in the codes, and it's no different really for the New York Stretch than it is for the base statewide energy code. So it's the same. It still provides enough leakage for the most part for the venting requirements, which are in both the base code and the New York Stretch, to provide sufficient air. In fact, it's much more highly performing if you follow the code and the New York Stretch Code.
Mike,
So,
I think what we're trying to get to though is that there are specific ventilation, mechanical ventilation requirements in these codes, both the
Yeah,
regular
that's what I was
code.
getting to.
Yeah, because I just want to make sure that's clear. It's not about leakage in the envelope isn't leaking per se. It's that these buildings now have mechanical ventilation. They literally have bringing air in, filtered
Right.
air in, and then they let the stale air out.
Well, that's correct. But what I'm getting to is that very common misconception amongst code officials.
Mhm.
They're all concerned that the buildings are too tight, that regardless, the ventilation requirements, which have been in the energy code, the base energy code, and now are better yet in the New York stretch, it's been there forever. But regardless of ventilation requirements, they're still concerned that we're making buildings too tight. We don't let them breathe. It's just an ancient concept that is very hard to debunk, and there isn't enough training to do that. I've spent my last 40 years training the code officials here, and it's tough. But the bottom line is, and the real answer is that, as you suggest, the New York stretch amendments to the base codes make the indoor air quality that much better, and we can be assured of its performance. Because in the stretch code, you have to actually test it to make sure that it's happening. So not a problem, and in fact, much improved with the New York stretch code.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And can you go back, Mike, about when you said it's not being adopted in 23? There's some, we'll say, rumors, definitely conversation in circles I've heard, and I guess maybe even some assumption on my behalf, thinking when it's part of for everyone else, it was an action, a high impact action for the clean energy community that you had to do it by December 31st of last year. And when I pushed and said, local government does not move that quickly. How can you do this? And they extended it. But part of the conversations I had, well, it's inevitably going to happen. So for Mike, for you to say that, I think I heard that the other day as well. Do you want to explain to the group about that?
Sure. Let me quick explain how the New York code cycle works. The New York state codes follow the national model code cycle, which occurs every 3 years. For example, we are now enforcing the 2020 building codes, including the energy code in New York State, which is based on the 2018 international codes, including the International Energy Code. The New York Stretch Code is roughly equivalent in stringency, in efficiency, to the next cycle of National Model Code, which is the 2021 International Energy Code. It is not the same code, so it is not correct to say it's the same, because there are several nuances and several differences in those codes that would take too long to get into right now. But in 2023 or so, we will adopt the 2021 base national model code, which will become probably the 2024 New York State Energy Code. And then at that time, and it's in the works, it's actually in a first draft right now, there will be another New York Stretch Code, the 2023 or 2024. So we follow the 3-year cycle. It is not, the next cycle is not adopting the New York Stretch Code. It's adopting something that's roughly equivalent, but it's different. Okay, and it's based on the national models. Does that make more sense? And the other difference is, because it's not the statewide code, the New York Stretch, you can use incentives from both NYSERDA that I showed earlier and from the utilities to pay for some of the elements of complying with it, like higher efficiency HVAC, or slightly more insulation, or air sealing. So a lot of advantages, and it's different. When you adopt the 2021 base energy codes statewide in 2023, you won't be able to do that. You'll only be able to then use incentives to work towards what will be another 3-year better New York Stretch Code after that.
So Mike, there was a lot of numbers thrown out there. Do you ever think that you could have maybe put that on a slide with just bullets with the numbers and what happens each year? And I could share that with the group.
I could do that at some point, yeah.
Yeah, there's no rush. But if I'm
Yeah, it's a
confused,
level of detail that most folks don't want to get into. But I appreciate that you do, Kate, and I'll do that for you. Actually, I have a slide that sort of does that. It's real, more people are more confused by it than not,
afterwards.
but I will do that.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands up or microphones muted, so I'll just ask my last one. Do you want to clarify at all the stretch to net zero NYSERDA PON program that you mentioned? Because I have it here. It was the first I heard of it recently, and I think it's an opportunity. We have Chester here, we have Highland, Goshen, Newburgh. It's an opportunity to really get things going. It's only 2.8 million is dedicated from the state, but it's up to $500,000 for a community to adopt Stretch and become a pilot to have all new construction become net zero emitters. So it's worth it to try and get in the game to win it. Mike, Mark, do you have anything to say about it?
Well, yeah, I'm not a program, neither of us are program people for NYSERDA. And I would highly recommend you get a hold of Liz Staubach. Again, you have this slide, or you will have it. And with all the contact information, including phone numbers, I would get a hold of folks. And yeah, if your community is thinking about it or already there or wants to go there, get in line quick, because the funding is going to go quickly. And it's my understanding that, you know, it's going to kind of build from New York Stretch, although New York Stretch is not a specific component of it. It will allow a community to go to New York Stretch and better to stretch to zero. So again, I encourage you to get a hold of Liz Staubach. All that's in the information in my presentation.
Right, and I have that
go
too. If
for it.
anyone's interested or needs to use me as a soundboard, please do. Mark, are you thinking about doing that? The town of Bedford then? Are you applying?
We are absolutely thinking about it because, as Mike said, it allows us to customize a code to our community that would allow or require buildings to be fossil free. And I think the way they explained it is that, you know, New York Stretch makes a building envelope and makes the building capable to have really low energy use, which then allows you to contemplate imposing, again, a all electric heating and cooling system. And that's what this pilot is all about, is developing a custom approach to that, which might be a model for the state.
Right, hence the name pilot. So it really is exciting. Well, I think Bedford's going to get it based on your track record. So that's wonderful. So anyone else have anything else to ask Mike before he reads the story and Mark has to go on to another meeting? Thank you so much, Mark, for coming in at the last few hours. Thank you, Mike, for being on the docket for the last few weeks. I appreciate that. If there's no more questions, we will move on to Jeff Demansky.
And let me just again encourage you, if you have any question, I'm always attending events like this and meetings, and, you know, 15 minutes later, I go, damn, I wish I had asked DeWine this or Teal King that or whatever. So do not hesitate to just pick up the phone and call. With that, I'm going to go read Good Night Moon to Maggie Jo, my granddaughter.
Oh, I love Good Night Moon. One of the favorites. All right. Thank you again, gentlemen. Have a wonderful night.
Well.
But please give up control to Jeff. Are you here, Jeff? Are you taking over? Are you sharing screens?
Yep, I'm sharing. Hope you can see
Great.
it.
So I'll start by saying Jeff Demansky is the Executive Director of the Center for Economic and Environmental Partnership. and he is working towards a more sustainable society since 1996. He's a subject matter expert supporting New York's Clean Energy Communities Program outreach team. And the center's Hudson Valley Energy Program is the program organizer for 2 Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA as we call it, and you'll learn all about it now, and programs serving 16 communities in the Hudson Valley. Jeff, please take it away.
Thanks, Kate. And I'm so glad that I had Mike and Mark speak ahead of me, so they'll help us move even quicker through some of the things I was going to say tonight. And so, yes, I'm going to dive into a little deeper, but start with a quick overview, maybe some other details that Mike and Mark didn't share on the CEC program, but then we'll take that deeper dive into Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA. So this is a chart. There's a reference to the dollars associated with the Clean Energy Communities Program. And it's a roadmap, the program, as you gleaned from the conversation tonight. And I'll show you on the next slide a table of these, the full list of high impact actions that we've been referencing, including what we've talked about tonight. But it is a guide for municipalities to make action, to make smart energy and cost and emissions reducing strategies. And it's a point-based system associated with the high impact actions. And if you accumulate points in the thousands, there are some not insignificant dollars that are available to communities. And I'll say too, as Kate mentioned, I'm supporting the outreach team. NYSERDA has a fantastic team of outreach coordinators for the Clean Energy Communities Program. And we have several folks here in the Hudson Valley, Carla Castillo and Eleanor Peck and Kat Carroll, just fantastic people. And so they definitely would point people to them, and I'm happy to connect you, and Kate can as well, for a deeper dive or an overview of the program or a deeper dive of any element of it. So there is a wonderful amount of support for these programs out there. And so here's that promise table of the high impact actions. And I'm not going to go over them in detail, but gleaning the table, you can see a lot of the strategies that were mentioned tonight, including LED streetlights. And here's the energy code actions and the points associated with it. Training for the base energy code at 200 points, and the stretch code that Mike talked about in some detail with the upper limits of the dollars available through 2 different mechanisms: points and an action grants. And then I am going to talk about this one right near the bottom, next to the stretch code, this community choice aggregation strategy and what it's comprised of. And it is the highlight here is that it's by itself of the actions here, it is the biggest point getter. So in some ways, a significant lift to do it, but also not very different than what's out there. And I'm going to make the argument for why people should consider this. And what I've discovered, and Kate knows as well, that in talking about these strategies, I've done a fair job of laying out a lot of detail that often confuses people. And so I've had the wonderful ability of working with Kate and others here that are on this call too, to try to refine the messaging, to see if we can bring some clarity and some encouragement for even considering this. So I thank you for your patience ahead of time. All right, so diving in deep just a little bit within the definition of the Clean Energy Communities Program still, or the CEC program. Not too many acronyms tonight from me, CEC and CCA, but here's that focus on the 2,000 points. And it's and before I dive into the breakdown, there's 2 sections, 2 separate accumulations of point that make that 2,000. But here's the definition, just at a high level, of what community choice aggregation is on the bottom. And it is a policy that enables municipalities, cities and towns and villages to determine default energy offerings. And in particular, the main 2 default energy offerings we're talking about are electricity supply and community solar, on behalf of their residents, small businesses, and other organizations. And fear not if some of you are confused a little bit about what electricity supply is and what this community solar thing is. This is what we will talk about in some detail tonight. And as I promised in the overview, I'll do it from a utility bill perspective. What does it really look like from a community member, from a utility customer's perspective? And they're often confused. So hopefully we can bring some clarity. But there are separate points for these two strategies, which can be offered as the new default options. And I'll talk about that default aspect of it too on an upcoming slide. But in the 2,000 point total that can be garnered for this high impact action, 1,500 points, or 3/4 of the points, can be garnered by launching a CCA program in your community. And this is something leadership does on behalf of its community members. This is not focused on the municipal buildings. This is a strategy that is for the community members, all of the community members, small businesses and residential customers and other institutions, churches and schools and libraries that are utility customers. And a program can launch, which can offer a fixed electricity supply rate for 100% renewable sourced generation from New York State sources. And if it does so, that community garners 1,500 points available. If it also, as a separate parallel option, offers an opt-out also for what they call community distributed generation, which is the very fancy term for community solar. Community solar is the kind of specific name for this CDG. Excuse me. There's another 500 points that are available. Do forgive me, I'm just getting over a head cold. All right, so this is a very important mental space divider here, that we're going to be talking about these two separate spaces: electricity supply and this community solar option. And because these are two of the main tools that comprise that are under the umbrella of CCA, or Community Choice Aggregation. Now, I'll say that both of these options, this electricity supply option, this idea of picking how and where and how much your electricity costs that you use each month, that's the electricity supply portion, and the option of entering into an agreement for community solar, or in essence being a virtual subscriber, or a subscriber to to virtually own a portion of a field of solar panels. These are some things that individual customers, utility customers in New York State can do right now. The electricity supply option, that's been available to individual customers since the late 1990s, since deregulation went into effect. And the community solar option, community solar is more recent, but you probably have been exposed to many advertisements in many different ways, and maybe even people knocking on your door offering you this option if you don't have solar on your home or business, that you can subscribe to community solar. So, excuse me. So with that in mind, a community leader might ask themselves, well, why should I get involved in this? Why should I, and why should we, with the other leaders in my community, why should we make a decision for our community members on an opt-out basis, this new default option, for which, what that default means is that if we offer these options as defaults, it means people are given either a fixed rate automatically on their bill, replacing the utility making that decision for them, or why should we give them a subscription to community solar if it's something they can do on their own? It's a fair question, and it's the biggest concern that community members have. And in the lower right, I've summarized in 2 points the major arguments for it. And I leave off of there a point that I'll bring up later. In essence, that this idea of introducing a default option is just replacing, when people don't realize it, it's just replacing an existing default mechanism that's in place now. But separate from that, and I'll come back to that idea that the CCA default options are just a replacement of the old state mandated default. The two arguments for why community leaders should act on behalf of their community members are: one, because of the numerous consumer protection aspects inherent in this. Excuse me for 1 second again. There's a lot of bad actors in the energy marketplace. Many of you have probably had bad experiences or know somebody who has when it comes to these ESCO opportunities. There have been companies that, excuse me, have fixed rate programs that have small print that turn variable, or contracts that have unexpected and sometimes large penalties for trying to get out of their contracts. The idea of a community choice aggregation program is that the community vets the opportunities that are out there and offers this as a default, but without any restrictions, without any contract. So it's truly offered as a public benefit in that way. And there is no small print or funny business that can trip up the community members. Second, there are a lot of different ways that the offers that are out there can be manipulated, both for electricity supply, as I mentioned in the contract, kind of funny business, and in the sense of community solar as well. So the idea of a partnership program under community choice aggregation is that the community leaders working with an administrator, a state approved administrator, which is required for this program, vets the opportunities and optimizes the opportunities for their community members. They basically act as a guide and give them the best of what's out there. And again, without any restrictions. And while these, through a CCA program, and that's the magic of CCA, is that it is a default program, which allows the optimization of the opportunities. It is done so with the understanding that anybody can reject it at any time. It's the new default, but everybody has all the other choices they had available to them if they want to. So they can just say no to it at any time. So those are the reasons that I think community leaders should feel strongly that it is worth the effort to act on behalf of their community members. So this is an opportunity. This is called my menu slide. And this is my analogy to going into a restaurant and looking at the appetizer menu and the entree menu, where you can pick one option from each of the menus to emphasize a number of things. One, emphasizing here what the supply choice is versus what a solar choice is, which includes community solar, as you can see, as one of the options. So consider, with that analogy of a restaurant menu, let's look at the entree here, the electricity supply option. There are three choices that a utility customer has in a CCA program, or prior to a CCA program launching. In a community, there's two options that any utility customer has with respect to electricity supply. And again, electricity supply is, and I'll show you a bill to distinguish what this means from electricity delivery, which it is not, is a choice for how and where and how much your electricity supply costs. The two choices that a customer has are, before a CCA program, are the state default. The existing default that I talked about is that the utility company will make that decision for you as the existing default. So that was established by deregulation. So if a utility customer does nothing when they have an account set up with their local utility company, the utility company, which makes its money on delivery services, if a customer does not make a choice for a supply, they are the default and will make that supply decision for them as a default choice. But because of deregulation since the 90s, any customer can enter into a third-party agreement with an ESCO, or an energy supply company. And Viridian, Ambit, Green Mountain Energy, these are examples of energy supply companies. If a CCA program launches, it becomes a third option. And the asterisk on that means it becomes the new default option, replacing number one as a default option. It's basically the community in partnership. It's aggregation and a collection of communities getting together for a new choice option for electricity supply. And it is basically giving opportunity for the energy supply companies to bid competitively to be the supplier for the community members in this aggregation of communities. And they want to do that, so they bid competitively to do so, leading to the optimization of the rate that's available. And I do apologize for my voice tonight. I thought I had it back, but apparently it's still fighting me. So that is the electricity supply option, which is different than the solar choices that any utility customer might make. So let's look at the second menu, the one on the right. When it comes to solar, these are the three options that a New Yorker has. they don't have to do anything about solar. That's choice A. They don't have to put it on their business. They don't have to subscribe to the community solar farm. But people can, as choice B says, they can put solar on their home or business. But if they don't have solar on their home or business, they can become a virtual owner of a portion of a solar field that's in their utility territory. The idea of community solar, the reason it came about and the reason the state is allowing it and supporting it is because it allows people to reap the benefits of the growth that's happening in solar deployments without having to install it on their home, which for many people like myself with large oak trees in my backyards, I can't have solar generation panels on my roof. So community solar is a perfect option for that. So I hope there's some understanding of clarity between the difference between electricity supply and these solar options. But also what the menu slide emphasizes is that for utility customers, and with the menu shown for a CCA program where there's 3 options for electricity supply, on my analogy of a menu in a restaurant where you can only pick one from each menu, but you can pick one from each menu in any combination that you want. So you can mix and match as an individual customer in any way that you want. So you can do a CCA for electricity supply and community solar. They're not, they do not interfere with each other. Or you could have CCA and no solar. Or you can have solar on your home or business and still do a CCA for electricity supply. So you can mix and match in any way. The benefit or the distinction also between CCA for electricity supply and community solar, the CCA is through a competitive bid process led by the aggregation of communities with their administrator, you obtain a low fixed rate for electricity supply and the emphasis for the state and for the work we're doing is for renewable generation sources versus community solar, which is not your supply source. So if somebody subscribes to community solar, this is not their supply. They get a guaranteed monetary discount on their bill by being a community solar subscriber. But it's not based and it's not tied to how much electricity they use in a particular month. It is really just a symbiotic relationship that allows them to reap benefit, encourage more production on the New York State, within New York State. But it is just a monetary benefit, not tied to supply. So making that distinction to try to reduce confusion. Where does the benefits, how do these benefits apply? One more little snippet at the bottom of the slides here. On the electricity supply side of my tables here, under CCA, if somebody subscribes as part of a CCA program and they're obtaining their electricity supply through a CCA program, that is a New York State-wide benefit. Through that action, they are putting demand for more renewables in New York State. And this is nuanced that I won't go into detail tonight unless there's a specific question about how the energy market works. But in essence, the requirement for the program is that the renewable sources be in New York State, but it can be anywhere in New York State. But there is a real benefit through the demand that this customer has through the CCA program for more renewables on the New York State grid. Versus community solar, while it is just a monetary symbiotic relationship, it's just a monetary benefit, it is a very real way that customers can also additively have more demand for more renewables on the grid. But in addition to putting more renewables on the grid, it's local. It has to be in the same utility territory. So just trying to lay out some distinctions between these 2 options that are still under the CCA umbrella. These are 2 tools in what I call the Swiss Army knife of what a CCA policy is: electricity supply and community solar. So what does it look like on a bill? So this is a Central Hudson bill, and I do have an Orange and Rockland bill on the next slide, just so you can see what they look like in different places. But looking at the bill is really useful from the customer perspective and seeing where these 2 different menu options live on the bill. And it's also important to distinguish what it is not, what these programs don't affect. And that is the top red box area of my Central Hudson bill. I live in Beacon. And what I've put in the box on the top in the red is the delivery charges section. And you can see that energy delivery charges on the third line within that red box section. All of those line items with their different rates in the middle column multiplied by the kilowatt hours of usage for that particular month, 573 on every line, plus the meter charge on the top, the basic service charge of $19.50. That's the money that Central Hudson makes. That's where they derive their revenue. They are a delivery company. That's what the state allows them to make money on and only allows them to make money on. So in essence, they're like UPS or FedEx, delivering a product to the customers reliably. They're not allowed to make the product. And a lot of people don't realize that. That's the supply decision. The supply is making the product, electricity in this case. And that's what the middle section is. And there are 3 line items, if you look in the middle box, in the middle of the page there for the supply charges. I won't go into detail what the lines are, but in essence, this is what it looks like when the utility is making the choice for the customer. There are 3 line items, and they add up. If you add up the middle column, which are in dollars per kilowatt hour, you get a rate for that month for how much somebody paid for the production, the creation of the energy that's powering their home or business. So that's where the energy supply section lives, which is separate from where anything related to solar lives. Whether somebody has a solar system on their home or business, or if they are a subscriber to Community Solar, that lives in the payments and adjustments section on a utility customer's bill. And I am a subscriber to a Community Solar project, and you can see that the thin box on the bottom is surrounding the discount I received on my Central Hudson bill for being a Community Solar subscriber. So it's $81, which I can talk about how I did have to pay a portion of that back, so I didn't receive a full $81 benefit, but I still received a benefit for being a subscriber to Community Solar. But that's where it lives. So again, delivery, different from supply, different from solar decision making. When somebody is in a CCA program for electricity supply, those 3 line items in the supply charges section are replaced by 1 line item. It becomes simpler if you're in a CCA program, which has picked a supplier to supply a fixed rate for the duration, an extended period of time for the program. I live in Beacon. This is my bill from the 2019 to 2021 contract that we had for a CCA program, and our rate during that time was 6.361 cents per kilowatt hour for every month of that 24-month period. And so that rate was the same for every single month, and this month it was multiplied by my usage of 761 kilowatt hours for my total supply charges. So very simple, and it actually identified the name of the company that our aggregation of communities picked. So this is actually what a bill looks like when you're in a supply program for CCA. And Beacon entered into a 3-year agreement with 9 other communities. And so the rate's just slightly different. It's about 6.5 cents. And I will end my last slide, show the performance of our program, of the programs that are here in the Hudson Valley. And the next slide is just an Orange and Rockland bill, just emphasizing, I won't go into the same level of detail, but there is a delivery charges section, there is a supply charges section, and there's a payments and adjustments section. So this is where a fixed rate for electricity supply would be for a CCA program, and this is where any solar benefits would be. So this is the same format used by every utility company. So last couple of slides, how are these programs doing for electricity supply? I'm not going to go into detail about any further about the Community Solar, but just the next 2 slides and the last 2 slides are about the performance of CCA in the Hudson Valley. The name of the CCA program for the 10 communities that we're supporting in Central Hudson Territory is called Hudson Valley Community Power. So that's what that name means on the left. And these are the communities that are part of it, including my city of Beacon. And this is the performance chart since the start of the 3-year contract that started in July of 2021. And there's a number of lines here. The red line is the average of the private contract opportunities that are comparable to the 100% renewable fixed rate offered by the program. So this is the average. The red line is the average of what an individual customer, if they went into the private marketplace and looked at what Green Mountain Energy or any of the other companies offered for a 100% renewable fixed rate option, this is what they were looking like. And it's about 9.1 cents when I calculated it. So it's a straight line, just showing that there is a benefit versus what an individual customer could get. Because the program rates are down here. The green line is the 100% renewable option offered to the communities as part of the CCA. And this is down at 6.6 cents per kilowatt hour. We also offered, the supplier that we picked also offered a non-renewable rate as an option, the non-default option. But if somebody wanted a little less expensive option for a fixed rate, that's the purple line. And that's just under 6 cents. But these two flat lines, the purple and the green, are our two program rates, and the green is the default for all of our communities. The yellow line is the month-to-month varying utility rate from Central Hudson. The blue line is the running average of that yellow line. So the blue and the yellow line were exactly the same point at the start of this contract period. And then as the rate went up, the average from the previous months, you can see that the blue line tracks the average of this fluctuating yellow line. The main point here, a couple of main points, but our program rates since the start of this program and in the previous contract, a number of months before this, were doing very, very well. The fixed rates were below the average of the utilities varying rate. So the flat lines are below this blue line, just showing that it works. It works well, and including that the chart's a little hard to look at on the left side because they're so close together, but that's because what many of you have heard about are the crazy increase in utility rates in the last couple of months, or it's going back to January, where January it went up to 11 cents at Central Hudson, up to 22 cents in February. And the just published rate today for March is at 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So the wonderful story here is that the community members in a CCA supply program are protected from these variations. And it's a very similar story with the Orange and Rockland program that we have, which is for 6 communities, all located in Rockland County. And they started a program back in a 2-year contract back in November 2020. And it's the same color coding of the lines. Program rates are the green 100% renewable. There is a second option, a non-renewable, that some community members can choose if they wanted. But in essence, it's the same story. The blue line being the average of the yellow line, the blue line crawling up and up and up and being above our program rates, showing that this is delivering not only on a very good competitive and fixed rate for 100% renewables, far better through the program than an individual could get on their own, the red line, but it's even outperforming the non-renewable variable utility rate. So it's just the power of numbers, of the marketplace, of how a CCA program could work. So that's the overview, and I hope I provided some clarity of this difference between and what electricity supply is and how this group buying club model works for CCA, and also kind of hinted at the benefit that it could also be utilized for offering community solar, coupled with the fact that the program does require education and outreach into the communities, which I think is very, very important because these topics are kind of overwhelming, things that people don't always pay attention to. And when you do get into it, it can be kind of confusing. I'm so glad that we have Olga here to talk about her experience in Highlands and the village of Highland Falls. I'm sure, Olga, you'll probably get into the details of the process and talk about some of the experience of exploring this. And I'm happy to say I think Michelle Lindsay was with us from Tuxedo, who is also in the process of exploring launching these programs. So our pioneers in Orange County for launching these programs. And I'll stop and I'll stay in the background for questions.
Thank you, Jeff. That's wonderful. You deserve that tall glass of water right now. Olga, well, are there any specific questions for Jeff about the programmatic? Or else we can go straight to Olga, who's going to give us live from the scene, cutting edge information, how Highlands, the town of Highlands in Orange County, is working on this.
I had
Okay.
a question.
Go ahead.
Hello, I had a
Yes.
question. Hi,
Hi,
this is
Kippy.
Kim. Hi. Jeff, thank you for that presentation. Um, I was under the impression that the city of Newburgh had at least adopted that they were going to go into the program. That's not really my question. My question to you is, when you have, is it one administrator for all of the communities, or does each community have to have its own administrator? Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kippy. So there are currently 4 approved administrators in New York, which I realize is not your question, but for an aggregation for for how communities aggregate together is through the administration choice that they make. And so directly to your question, all of these communities all picked the same administrator for the program. And the administrator was in charge of gathering them together and doing the technical work of getting the program launched. Communities can choose to self-administer. They can form their own aggregations. They don't have to choose one of the currently approved administrators. They would have to be approved ultimately to do so. But it is allowed through the CCA order that you can organize to become an administrator.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Sure.
What is the minimum amount of communities that you need to have an aggregation?
There's no minimum number of communities, but you're right. There is sort of a threshold, kind of a minimum level to have leverage to attract interest of the bidding suppliers. And it's a little fluid. There's no hard and fast number, but the ballpark is, what I've discovered is somewhere between 15 to 20,000 meters, customers to have with their average usage. To get over the threshold of having a viable aggregation. There's actually sort of an upper level too. It's not an infinite, it's not more is the better, because when you get bigger and bigger, sometimes it's intimidating to the suppliers. But it's not upon, unless there's a real interest in forming their own administration method. It's typically, and it's not, there's more than 160 communities that have passed the local law to do CCA, which is the first step. And to the previous question, the city of Newburgh has passed the law, but that's where they are right now. The second step is picking an administrator, and nearly every community so far of the 60 active CCA communities in New York State, they've all chosen to engage one of the approved administrators so far.
I have another question. If how long do these aggregations? Actually, a bunch of questions, but I don't want to be hog on the time. How long do the aggregations last? And if a community decides, if you do form this aggregation and the community decides to, one community out of the aggregation decides to leave, do you have to renegotiate? And the last question is, if you negotiate at a high rate, let's say now it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour. If you negotiated something around that and the energy cost drops substantially, are you stuck with that high cost, or can you renegotiate at a lower cost?
There was a few questions in there, so
yes, there was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I guess how long do the aggregations last? That was one. If one person or one community drops out, do you have to renegotiate the aggregation? And the third one was, if the rates drop substantially and you find yourself on the negative end of it, because it could happen. I mean,
sure.
do you get can you renegotiate it, or are you stuck with that higher rate when everyone else is paying the lower rate? If it flips, let's say.
So the first question again was the duration of a typical aggregation, and they've been 2 and 3 year contracts that are common, but they could be anything. Okay. Those are what have been accepted, but they've been offers during the bidding process of, I've not seen less, but 12 months has been offered, 48 months has been offered as well, and everything in between. So the suppliers will bid different combinations with different rates for different periods, and it's up to the communities in aggregation, guided by their administrator, to choose what they think is the optimal choice. And what's been chosen so far has been 2 and 3 years, pretty much around the state, including here in the Hudson Valley. Communities they enter into agreement, a 3-party agreement, once a supplier is picked. They get to voice their kind of like lines in the sand for what they require for being part of it. during the development of the request for proposal process. And then, but there's an expectation that if a compliant bid that meets all those lines in the sand requirements, that they're in for the duration of the contract. So it's not been an issue, and it's not expected. It's not been an issue that a community would drop out. But a very essential component of this, as I mentioned before, is that any community member can opt out of this at any time. And it's not something that's done in the cover of dark. You know, and matter of fact, my involvement, my nonprofit's involvement is very much speaking to the interest of being very outgoing and a consistent presence within the community to constantly communicate about how it's doing, good or bad. You know, that's part of this. And there was times when the first 2-year contract that the 10 communities in the Hudson Valley Community Power Program were in, there were a number of months during the pandemic when the bottom dropped out of the economy that the utility rate was lower than our program rate. And people did exit, but it always was so much better than what people could do in the private market. So it's very important to remember that as well. So while community members don't, can drop out at any time, communities didn't necessarily. And did I catch the last question?
I think, yeah, that kind of answered it. I think the comment, yes, that kind of answered it. Thank you very much for answering the questions. I appreciate it.
And Mark, feel free to stay on. We're just going to move on with our other speaker. But stay on and we can hang back and talk about all this, and anyone else who's interested is welcome. It's so confusing. I've been here for a while doing it with Jeff, and every time I learn something new. And Jeff, I love the menu. Really great, very clear and concise. I still have questions, but all right. So Olga, can you tell us about Highland, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me here tonight. Yeah, I'm the chair of the Town of Highlands Citizens Environmental Advisory Committee. The town recognized our committee on Earth Day of 2019. And that's when our journey down the road towards CCA began. So we formed in April, and we kind of used the Clean Energy Communities and Climate Smart Communities programs as templates for the work that we wanted to do. And as Jeff showed you, one of the action items on the Clean Energy Communities program was the CCA, Community Aggregation. So we embarked on that road. We had Jeff, we invited Jeff to come out and speak with our committee in the fall of that year of 2019. We literally took an entire year and change to educate ourselves, our committee members. We went to a variety of meetings that were taking place that Jewel was hosting in our neighboring communities, like in Rockland. They were kicking CCA off in Rockland. They were putting one together in New Paltz. So we took quite a while to educate ourselves about the program. We really didn't feel like we were ready to bring anything to our town board or our village board without really knowing that we were comfortable in the concepts. So by one of the things that we did once we felt comfortable, we thought it was important for our boards to hear from their peers. So we invited, let's say for our town board meeting in late 2020, we invited a gentleman who was a trustee down in the village of South Nyack in Rockland County, who had signed up for CCA. And we just felt that it was important for our board members to hear from their peer about how they went about making this decision for their community down in South Nyack. And that was very, very effective. It wasn't just me standing up there and telling them, look, this is a good idea. It was somebody outside the community who could speak to them about the value of this for their residents. Those meetings are televised, so everybody in the community could see that as well. And then Jeff came and he spoke to our village board. So we were working both with the town board and the village board to bring them both up to speed, so they would both have to pass the local law that would enable going forward with CCA. So just about a year and a half after our committee was formed, we had the town pass a resolution to go for CCA. And a couple of months later, the village board passed a resolution. So it took a year and a half for us to get from the beginning of our committee work to where we had CCA signed and on the books for both our town and our village. At that point, once we had both resolutions passed, we formed a subcommittee that was charged with identifying the administrator that we were going to use. We selected individuals, 4 individuals, 2 from the town, 2 from the village of Highland Falls, and 2 who lived outside the village to represent the town. So those 4 individuals went about the process of sending out questionnaires, interviewing the potential administrators, and coming up with their selection. And they did select Jewel, because Jewel was the only administrator that met the criteria that our subcommittee had set for our CCA. So that's that was our journey. We have in October, Jewel was selected and they began their formal planning. And we have since then had our initial kickoff with the town. The village will be hopefully kicking off shortly, and that we will be beginning to do all of our public outreach with both entities very well. And any day now, we're we've got everything in place to begin to do that. So that's
Olga,
how we got from there to here.
Olga, that's great. Thank you. And I want to laugh because see, if the 2 Highlands and Falls consolidated, we would only have 1 CCA. But really the county has 2 CCAs since the consolidation failed. I'm sorry about that. But just to go back to what I keep pushing, Olga doesn't belong to a CAC or an ERB. They invented their own term, Environmental Advisory Committee. So you can make that up too. You don't have to have the same role as the CAC and do the development proposal. You could just do the good work. What their group has also worked on is recycling, composting. Tell me if there's other things, but I guess in the interest of time, we'll stay focused on this. So if you don't have any specific questions for Olga, or if they could wait and you want to think it over in your head, we're going to move on to our last speaker, Montgomery's Conservation Advisory Commission, CAC Chairperson Patricia Hennigan will share the many successes of her group, specifically the Natural Resources Inventory, the NRI I keep talking about, Critical Environmental Areas, CEA, that's a new acronym for the night at 7:45, and Water Quality Monitoring of the Tin Brook, a local stream in the town of Montgomery. And I'm sorry, Olga, I did not get to introduce you. We got interrupted there. So thank you, Olga. And Patricia, take it away. Where are you? You're good. You have to unmute, Patricia. And then please stay on. We'll have all questions at the end as long as you need to be. There we go, Patricia. Thank you.
So thank you for inviting me. As I am the chairperson of the Town of Montgomery Conservation Advisory Council, and Kate asked me to talk about 3 topics. The first one, the updating of our natural resources inventory, which we completed in 2020. This was a lengthy process that we spent at least 3 years working from our original document, which was done by a consultant in 2008. And it had a lot of good information, but the maps were all printed and hard to read. So with the help of Laura Heady from the Hudson River Estuary Program, we were able to get the Orange County Planning Department to digitize and expand the maps available. She also helped us by writing a summary of important species and habitats in the town of Montgomery, which we included in our updated NRI. And then as we were moving along, she went to a different position, but we were given to another person from Hudson River Estuary Program, Nate Nardi Cyrus, and also Gretchen Stevens from Hudsonia. And they pretty much walked us through getting the whole thing done. We had to collect photographs, write short text for each of the maps, and present it to the town board to have it accepted as a resolution. At the same time, the town was working on their new comprehensive plan. So we worked with the comprehensive plan committee and their consultant, got additional information from them, and also provided them with a lot of information. So we completed the final document in 2020, and we had it included as an appendix to the town's final comprehensive plan, their new comprehensive plan, and also had the town accept it through a resolution in 2021. So if for people who are maybe starting this journey or considering redoing their original document, I would recommend creating a natural resources inventory, which was put up by DEC and Cornell University. It's a wonderful wealth of information, and it's good for people either beginning or updating. It's also good to look over other people's NRIs from different townships to get ideas. Every group does them a little bit differently. I think that from having completed our updated NRI, we were able to, we were considered for another grant that came out through Hudsonia, and they were interested in getting CACs to consider proposing critical environmental areas in their township. This appealed to me particularly because I always felt aggravated when I read on the EAFs that there was no critical environmental areas there, simply because no one had ever declared an critical environmental area. So I really was very happy that we could work on this. Again, we worked with Gretchen Stevens. We formed a committee. We had a few members of our CAC and one town board member. And we went through all the maps and decided to choose Tin Brook and Beaver Dam Brook aquifers since they feed the well fields of, they are part of the, cover the municipal well fields and the public school wells. And we felt that this would have the least opposition in our community. Gretchen Stevens wrote our proposal and we presented it to the town board in January. And now next month, we have a meeting for the public hearing. So we're moving ahead with it and hopefully it will come to fruition very soon. The third thing that Kate mentioned, the water quality monitoring with Tin Brook, is also something we have been working on for a while, and we were very concerned about the area of Tin Brook because of the development, particularly Amazon and some others in that area. And it just so happened that New York State DEC invited watershed groups and others to suggest an unassessed stream segment that they would consider monitoring for 2 years. So this was a fairly heavy competition. They got a lot of applications. And we worked with the Waukeil River Watershed Alliance and Riverkeeper, and were able to put in a successful application. So they accepted it, and they will be looking at the areas we suggested for the next 2 years. And our part is to share the information with the public and get involved in finding other ways to protect these watersheds. So that's pretty much where we are right now.
Fantastic, Patricia. Thank you. I guess I'll stop again and remind the crowd how to, again, does she get all this done? Because they have a CAC, they have this group of volunteers, and the only 3 communities, well, Warwick, they've been there, but recently Blooming Grove, Montgomery, and Cornwall have all prepared NRIs with the help of our department, but more DEC, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Hudson Estuary Program specifically. And the county, again, I've been trying so hard. We just lose staff. We have an international pandemic, a few other things, just to get it mapped for you, because we were able to help with through grant funding those 3 communities. So I'm trying to get communities mapped, because if we give it to you, the map, the updated of the natural resources, you can then, you being a municipality, can sit down as an interested body of people, volunteers, whatever you want to call yourself, and start saying, well, we could do that, and we could develop this, and why don't we identify this and plan for this open space if we ever get money, and why don't we consider a CEA here? And those are the things that people sit down and you bring it to the board, and there's lots of back and forth, but you first need the map, and that's a big thing. So for instance, the town of Woodbury right now, they are rewriting their master plan, and they do have a consultant. So the consultant, they could pay for that within there, but instead the consultant comes back to us and says, well, don't you have that? And we are trying to do that. And Tuxedo we're working with, we should have maps for Tuxedo to look at, but their CAC kind of dwindled. So they need to get a group of people together to really look at this map. The county, if we can work with you, if you want, and you demonstrate that there's a group of volunteers that want to help, we're going to try and map it for you. And then you need to look at the map. You need to look, say, for accuracy. You can take as much time as you want, but come back once. Come back once with all your changes. We will make it. We bring it back to you. And then you have to accompany it with some narrative. And that's basically what the NRI, the Natural Resources Inventory, is. That gets your points for climate smart community, and it gets you to start identifying that conversation that Patricia had with everyone. Where do we want to protect? Why do we want to protect this? Why does this have a higher value than this? Where do you want to put your industry? Where do you want to put your warehouses? Your zoning can be based on that, or at least certainly modified and adjusted. So please let me know again, if you're interested in starting any group, if I could help you with anything. I would like to ask more, though, the CEA. Patricia, do you want to specifically identify that? I don't know if you really talked about that in particular.
Yes, and I had the definition out, so I would remember to say it. But if you look on the Hudson River Estuary Program website, they define it as a geographical area with exceptional or unique character with respect to one or more of the following. And they talk about benefit or threat to human health, a natural setting, agricultural, social, cultural, historic, archaeological, or recreational, ecological, geological, hydrological sensitivity. So it can really encompass a lot of different areas. And as I said, we thought we wanted to choose one that we felt people would feel most, attracted to if we're talking about drinking water supply. So we thought that would be a good start, because other areas maybe people aren't as interested in, protecting a habitat for a certain species. So we thought this was a good way to start.
And I believe the town of Goshen may have several.
Okay.
I don't remember. That was a while ago when they established that. Was someone going to say something? Anyone? So, when you say unique area, we have that Kawawasi unique area. That could have been something, right? I look at it that it's before you get the OSI or any private or public funding to save something, to purchase it. This is an opportunity as a placeholder to protect it, so that Amazon or a Legoland or all the biggies that are coming to our area, and they are coming, can't just, muscle their way in. So it is invaluable, the work you're doing. Thank you so much. Now, does anyone have any questions about anything that they'd like to follow up? And again, did we lose Mark? Because we could stay on Mark. I think he got all, no, there he is. So any other questions, comments?
Mark is actually a member of our CAC and he was part of that committee that worked on the CEA.
So Mark, it sounds like he's going to be working on CCA in Montgomery next, right? With all of his questions for Jeff?
It sounds very interesting, especially with the way the energy has been fluctuating. It's something you can sell to towns. It's something I think you could sell the communities, because, you know, everyone's getting hit really hard with this energy, especially the last few months. And I don't think it's going to get any better with the fluctuation. And if we can somehow convince the communities to aggregate, and I think, you know, it's money, and people don't want to, you know, people want to save money. So it's not something esoteric or, you know, whatever. And I think it's a great idea. I'm very interested in a lot of those things. The LED lights was another one. I had a question on it. I don't know if it was part of what Jeff was talking about, or he alluded to. I was wondering, like, at what point, how much do these LED, like, to switch over to LED lights for 50% of your street lights, how much is the initial outlay, and how long does it take the community or to recoup the money? Because I think you get 900 points for that, and that sounded like a big amount of points. And the other question I had, I don't mean to go on, but one other question I had is, I looked at the amount of grants available for small to medium communities, and I think for the second and third level, the 4,000 and 5,000 points, there's no grants left. So what would be the incentive for a community to go beyond 3,000 at this point, if you're a small community, if there's no grants available?
Right. So the problem is with that, and I hope that this is the second time NYSERD has been doing that. I hope the next time they're at bat for the next CEC program, they will take that into consideration and either make the regions smaller. What happens is, before they even put it out, the money's gone, because the villages, like we just heard from Mark in the town of Bedford, in more, you know, wealthier, affluent, educated communities, it's gone. They've already done all this. Did you see? He did in 2009, they did a greenhouse gas inventory. That was before the county. So when you have a wealthy population that usually retires in their 40s and they're looking for fun things to do in their spare time, they do a greenhouse gas inventory followed by a climate action plan for fun. They're going to get the points right away. So those have all been gobbled up, and I hope that NYSERDA, it has been noted by them. But that gives us time to get our ducks in a row and to get things going on now, because NYSERDA there is money. There will continue to be money for energy. You heard me say before, the system benefits charge. If you go deeper into your electric bill, maybe Jeff has that on a slide, we're all paying a system benefits charge, which goes into NYSERDA to afford these programs. So the money will continually be there, and hopefully they will just incentivize you. You know, the bar goes up, definitely goes up. So you have to look at what they're offering now and go higher. And Montgomery, of course, has always been on the top of their game. The LED streetlights, I won't say it's challenging due to ownership. It should be a lot quicker, but it's not. And Jeff, I'm hoping you could echo, because I haven't talked about this in a while. Unfortunately, you have to identify them. You have to figure out who owns them. The utilities aren't the most organized, and I've heard nightmarish stories about, we didn't know we had that. So unless you know, there are these companies out there that will inventory them for you, tell you you're overpaying, and they'll take a percentage of it. A lot of municipalities have done that over the years. If you need those names, get back to me when I'm at work. I could look that up for you. But the rate of return on LED lights, quick, 3 years maybe. Yeah, very fast rate of return. Jeff, do you have anything to say about that? Are you even with me still? Did you go drink water? Go ahead.
I'm here. Does beer count? Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's 2 years is not unusual with LED lights, but you're right. I mean, and it's worth knowing. And you know, I'm thinking a lot about how you got to support the communities in these efforts, because yeah, that utility bill story around streetlights is a totally different animal in terms of the different categories that different utilities use. But there are, again, great resources for that. I would point everyone to the Clean Energy Community Outreach Team. They're knowledgeable about this, can point people to other resources like Pat Courtney Strong and the folks she was working with in Westchester. And I just did, kind of an honest slight against Westchester, but they've got great experience down there. So a lot of people have been treading these paths, and there's great trails to follow to get to the answers.
Right, and I'm going to just tell you for the lights, I don't know how many of you go down to the outlets or just travel on 17. And you see now when New York State does a road improvement, they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it the right way, which the right way is the suburban or urbanized right way. So you have all those street lights and they're all LED and they're so close together. And I never understand why. It seems like probably smarter engineers than me. Why haven't they figured out that the lumens and the wattage, it's all a little different, the equation. So if you do go for LED lights, remember, they are brighter. You can space them further apart. Less pole expense, less fixture expense, less maintenance expense. They keep lumping it close, replacing pole for pole. You don't have to because you're spreading it out. You have to make sure it's down shielded so that you will get a brighter light further. But certainly if you do it, consider that because you're saving more money and they are brighter and a different hue. As I can look out my corner right now, you will have complaints from folks. So you really want to be mindful of the amount you're doing. And when they need to be replaced, you can go into seizures because they blink like that, which some of you may have seen. So you have to be on that one too. But again, it's a no-brainer and it's easy to do. Any other questions before I may ask my few to Jeff? Mark, please feel free. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm set that, but thank you very much for the answers. They were great answers. A lot of information. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So Jeff, I'm going to ask you the one question. You said that the utilities are not allowed to charge for supply. First of all, I think that you should design their bills. Just the simple outlining and the few balloons and text made it so much easier to understand a bill. I'm sure the folks on the call agree with me. But, you know, why are they so against any of the changes in the last 2 decades, trying to get them to accept solar on the grid, through the pole, through the meter? You know, they have been resistant to everything. Maybe the last 5 years, they're playing a little better in the sandbox. I thought they were still at least able to sell, if they were supplying the energy, they were able to make money on it. Did that change?
Well, since deregulation, since the 90s, they've not been allowed to make money on supply. I mean, they can all own a small, very small portion of generation, like Central Hudson has a few hydro plants.
Right.
I'm not fully aware of there, but they're generally, there's a strong limitation on what they can own in terms of generation. So they're not, so they should be agnostic to much of this coming online. But, you know, if we have another couple of hours, we can dig into the details about how they'd like their business models to change. You know, we've heard this directly. Yeah, I think you and I were together at that conference in Newburgh a couple of years ago when Con Edison was saying how they wanted to get into basically to the CCA game, to be able to play that administrator role and be involved in generation sources, thinking that they have the better angle. But ostensibly, they should be agnostic to this. They talk about operational logistic challenges to sort of the bill alignment. The thing that's allowed that opt out for community solar, you know, in addition to the electricity fixed rate, was the compliance finally, so in theory at least, by all the utilities to serve as the pass-through for payments for community solar subscriptions. But you know, I wonder to what degree the operational challenges of changing their bills around required. But after observing what's happened up here in the last half year plus with Central Hudson, I wonder less and fear more about how much that comes down to. And thank you for your compliment about understanding the simplicity, just for folks to know too. I mean, part of the work we do in terms of educating the community members here is we actually work directly with Central Hudson to design a utility bill course, how to understand your utility bill, because they redesigned it, but it still confuses the heck out of people. And sometimes in my more cynical moments, I swear they do it on purpose to make things seem strange.
Yes, so, all right, well, I suppose the last thing, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to answer this, you know, what I heard from someone back in the day, long time ago, about just renewable energy in general, for all the large amount of variety of programs, you know, the electric utility prices are just going up. At least if you invest in solar, at least you could expect some regularity. And I said, okay, that's right. And then we saw it go down, and that was pre-war, pre a few other things. What about the fluctuation? I've said this to you before, and I'll end this on just so folks can hear. I've said to Jeff, why is the contract so short? And I think I heard you say that they're talking about that. But you make, again, an overtaxed municipality come back and revisit it again and again to renew the contract. Whereas it would be easier for them to just do, you know, one and done. That's good, 5 years, put that on the shelf, move on to the next topic.
So why is the contract length, you know, do you consider short, like 2 to 3 year contracts typically for the supply program?
Right, right.
It's because of just having the ability to be nimble, just in case there's changes in the marketplace. There is the expectation that there will always be escalation in utility rates over time. It's 2% escalation annually is what they've always assumed. But we did see some unusual things happen. You know, the pandemic
Right.
caused a strange dip. So, you know, the contracts are going to get longer, I think, as you know, as this matures. I don't think CCA, the supply club buying mechanisms, are going to be the forever solution. I think maybe 20 years from now, we'll see something very, very different. But maybe for 10 plus years, this will be a very useful strategy. And as there's more comfort, the contracts are going to get longer. We went from a 2 to a 3 year. 4 years was considered by the municipalities, but the rate just wasn't as favorable. But as all players involved get more comfortable, I think we will see longer contract periods.
Right. So don't keep us in suspense. I need to be able to sleep tonight. What's happening in 20 years?
Well, I don't know. Good God, who knows? What
Oh, okay.
You might have home generation by that point in time, and like truly microgrids. Who knows? But
I don't know.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the last 20 years went pretty fast, and we're still basically on an even keel. But I do feel technology is taking over now, and there could be some difference. I would be thrilled enough if it stayed like this and it was more municipal based. You were going to say what, Jeff?
Well, just one point. One point was kind of springboarding off of what you said too about, you know, these taxed municipalities and the challenge. We did a renewal with the 10 Hudson Valley community power communities from a 2 to a 3 year contract, and it's a very low lift the second time around. It's the renewal process is really relatively easy, and we're about to do it with the Rockland communities. You know, their 2 year contracts coming up in November. We're in the process already of just revisiting, getting the RFP together. It's a much easier lift. But the idea of it too is the administrator makes it really relatively low burden. There's no cost at any point directly to the municipality. You know, no direct cost except for opportunity cost of legal review and the like. But it does become very streamlined and simple, and these are really well vetted tools. You know, the administrator agreements, the supply agreements, they've been looked at by dozens and dozens and dozens of communities. So there's a high level of confidence that makes it easier.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. I can end on that good note. Does anyone have anything left to say? All right. I just want to make sure I have Mark's email. Patricia, please email that to me. If anyone else is interested in getting on my email list, I don't think I have Richard. Please let me know. Irma, I want to make sure I have you too. Email me at that, and we'll put you on for future information. And thank you for joining us. We could stay on if you have any other questions. I could stop the recording and we can keep talking. But otherwise, I'll let you all go. Have a wonderful night. And hopefully we'll see you on the 21st when we talk about the Clean Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which Mark made reference to and assumed we all knew. It is so complicated, so big, 800-page draft document. We do not know about it, but we're going to learn about it on March 21st. So come on back. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Bye.
Great.